tonight to introduce not only a good friend, but our speaker, retired Chief of Police, Dave Lewandowski. Dave grew up in Wisconsin, and after graduating from high school, he was in the U.S. Army, where he was an Airborne Ranger and an MP. After he left the military, he started a long career in law enforcement that lasted 35 years, and he worked as a patrol officer, shift commander, investigator, active shooter instructor, department liaison to the community and media, undercover drug investigator, major crime investigator, burglary investigator, suicide investigator, firearms instructor, fatality crash investigator, just to name a few things. Once he became chief of police, he started reconnecting the community with his department, having an open door policy, and he also started a canine program, a bike patrol, police auxiliary, and neighborhood watch. So it's my honor to introduce our speaker, Dave Lewandowski.
Just a couple housekeeping things. Yes, I still like coffee, and I really, really appreciated the donuts, but there was I'm still into my donut phase yet after all these years. Kathleen kind of summed a lot of it up for me. I'm actually kind of proud to be here. I have not spoke in front of people in just about 8 years. So it's a little bit, what's the word I'm looking for? Slower for me to do than I used to do. So I used to speak constantly as being a chief, and I loved doing the job. I turned 55 8 years ago, and I decided to pull the pin after 35 years. And since then, I still dabble. I'm actually a shunned instructor for a company called Land Security. They're located up in Fort Collins, and I teach all their armed guards, which they have quite a few of them. And I teach all their armory to them, everything that has to do with weapons, I teach it to them. And the simulations that we do is very real. It's really good training too for these guys. And for security, so I kind of went from the public sector, from the government side, and then I went into the private sector. And it's been good for me. It's a good retirement job, and the weight off my shoulders was a ton, and I don't deal with that pressure anymore that I had. Who am I exactly? I'm a kid that graduated from high school at the age of 17. I went to the United States Army at the age of 17, and I did my 18th birthday in basic training in North Carolina. And since then, I went through law enforcement training after training after training, and then I finally decided somewhere right around my 35 to 40 years of age that I needed to get a little bit more involved with higher up. I kind of exhausted my way of being a patrol officer. I was a shift commander. I was an instructor for EVOC, which is Emergency Vehicle Operation Control stuff. So I was doing all that, but I needed a little bit more. And a friend of mine told me, he says, you need to go back to school, because he says, nowadays you got to get a degree. So I went back and I got my associate's degree. It was already done, and then I went into my bachelor's, and then I went and got my master's in criminal justice to the UW at Madison. Go Bucky Badgers. And I did a lot of this over when the line came through with the emailing and everything technology started coming along. And so I've got my experience with that pretty fast, and how to do homework, how to be on time with it. And then once I got my master's degree, a position came open in my hometown, which is about, the surrounding communities and everything, about 55,000 people.
Yeah.
And it's a smaller area, but it's enough for me.
What town?
The town was Wisconsin Rapids. If you're familiar with it, it's central, it's right smack in the middle of Wisconsin, period. Oh, okay, what part? Oh, yeah, Nina. Yeah. Really? I didn't know. It is, I like that. So anyway, when I went through the schooling and I got all the education, the position came up as chief in my hometown. And my wife and I thought about that for a little while, and we thought about it some more. And I said, oh, what the heck, I'm not getting any younger. I am getting So I applied for it. There were 7 people that applied for the job. Most of them were from Milwaukee and Chicago that applied for it. I happened to be the only guy that was a cop 28 miles away, and I was from my hometown. I thought it was going to be a little bit an advantage, and it turned out that it really was. But unfortunately, when I got the position, I did get hired as a chief. I found out that there was things that I wasn't expecting, and it was coming from politicians, it was coming from friends, it was coming, people came out of the woodwork. You have no idea. I had friends that I was buddy with in high school. We did things that probably I will never repeat again, and they were probably illegal somewhere along the line. But my friends started wanting favors, and they wanted things from me, and they said, hey, you should get involved in this, you should start doing this, and our neighborhood watch program needs money, and blah, 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 blah. And it went on and on and on. And finally, about 3 months into this, I decided I needed to regroup the whole department, because the department wasn't very, they were closed, and the door was always closed. And the department was just kind of going down a path that I started feeling to myself that it wasn't going to be good for the citizens. So I had an open door policy, and that kind of helped me get to know people a little bit better, the people I didn't know. And I decided that I needed to start forming community relations, and the neighborhood watch was really one of them. That was one that opened the door. And then I formed an auxiliary police, which was made up of people who went to the academy, the Citizens Academy. It was a good thing that we did, and I had other officers in the department that jumped on board, and we got the community back involved, and then it just kept rolling, and one thing after another. We had a bike patrol, and then people were saying, you should really go for a dog and get a dog in this department. We need one. And I wrote 4 grants prior to this, and the 5th grant I wrote was for a dog. And I'll tell you what, that you talk about politics all by itself with a canine. I got it from both ends. I mean, I was in the middle of the fence 99.9% of the time in my chief career, but most of the time it was pretty good. People were caring, and they really did want things better for the community. But the dog was an issue, and it became more of an issue just due to the fact that they found out that the grant paid for the dog the first year, but it didn't pay for the dog after the first year. So where are we going to get the money to fund the dog? Well, so my cops kind of went out and about, and they started talking to the citizens, and the people came forward, and they started donating money. And it was about $67,000 later that we raised for the dog. We had wine tasting events. I don't remember any of them. We had all kinds of events, and my wife's laughing because she knows exactly what I'm talking about. We had a lot of things that we did to raise money for the dog, and we raised it, and the following year was then paid for. And then we found out the year after we had to start raising more money, and it was becoming a challenge to do this, because the citizens, after you're only dealing with 40-some thousand people, they have enough after a while. So, why can't they just budget it? Well, that was actually a good idea. So we went to the city council, and city council decided, yeah, let's budget it. And they did. And then it paid for the dog, it paid for the officer to handle the dog, it paid for the vehicle that the dog was in. And that program grew into 4 dogs after that program, and it grew and it grew and it grew. Before I left, my objective was to get every officer to have a dog. I ran into some opposition with that, but it boiled down to money. And to this day, they do not still have that. I've been retired now for, officially, it will be 8 years, July 31st. And, but I stay in contact with the people back there. I have an investigator that she keeps me posted on all the politics and all the things that go on. Jamie and I were back home here last, I think it was in January, February, we went back to Wisconsin, and we had lunch with her, and she was telling me all the juicy gossip that goes on. And I walked out of that luncheon place that we were at, the lunchbox place, and I walked out of there, and I said to Jamie, I go, you know what? They got a lot of issues going on, but I don't care. I like Colorado. We love it out here. I don't have any regrets moving here. I have family. I have a stepsister that lives in my stepsister lives. She lives in Broomfield, and I have brothers and sisters all over the country. Most of them are within driving distance, because yours truly doesn't fly. And I could get into that story, but that's a whole nother flight from Las Vegas that went over to Grand Canyon really bad. So anyway, during my course of my career, the one thing that I found very challenging was code blue. And you'll hear the words code blue from time to time. You'll hear it when the flag that has the blue stripe in there. That's a symbol of code blue. It means a camaraderie with law enforcement, that they stick together and they are one for all and all for one. Well, that code blue has different divisions off of that. It kind of spreads around a little bit. And the first time I experienced code blue was I was at a crash. It was an accident. And back then we called them accidents. Now they call them a crash. And when I was at the crash scene, a cop came up to me. I didn't know who he was, because I was pretty much a rookie. And he was from another jurisdiction. And he said to me, he goes, "Do you understand what's going on here?" And when I looked at him, I said, "Yeah." I said, "Car A goes in ditch B and flips over and dies." And he goes, "Do you know who's in that car?" And I said, "No." He said, "Well, that guy in that car happens to be a politician." I said, "Oh, well." I said, "The one that's dead?" And he goes, "No, the one that's in the passenger seat that's still alive." And I had a bad feeling that this conversation was not going to go well. So I was the first officer on the scene, and when that happens, by Wisconsin rule, and I won't quote Colorado because I don't know, but Wisconsin rule is the first officer on the scene is the officer in charge. Doesn't matter if a lieutenant comes or sergeant comes or captain comes, the person that's first officer on the scene in Wisconsin is the officer in charge. Now, I can designate state patrol, I can designate the captain, say, "Hey, captain, this is way above my head, can you please take this crash?" But I'm the one that was there. I'm the one that I was the one that found the dead body that was ejected from the car, and I'm the one that found the passenger that was still alive, upside down inside the car. So I said to the officer that I didn't know, I said, "Well, no, I don't believe the politician." Well, yeah, okay, so, well, that means that whatever you get information from that person, you will not release. And I kind of turned sideways. I'm like, "Well, who are you?" He says, "I'm so-and-so from the county." And I'm like, "Okay, well, this is my crash scene, and unfortunately, it's going to be released because I'm going to write it down and put the truth in." And he says, "You don't know how the system works." And I said, "No, I guess I don't." Well, he says, "Let me enlighten you." He said, "This is the way it goes, boy." And he said, "This is the way it's going to go." And he says, "You are not going to release that name." He says, "You are going to give me anything you have in your notebook." And I'm actually freaking out, because I'm like, I got another fellow cop who's probably got 15 years on me as far as being law enforcement. So I broke away from him. I went over to my sergeant that was there, and I said, "Hey, Bob," I said, "this guy over here wants this dude's name." And my sergeant grabbed it and he says, "Give it to him." And I turned to my sergeant and I looked at this cop and he kind of sat there and smiled, and I'm like, "What the hell is going on here?" That's called code blue. And I found out very quickly that if you're advised by somebody that's a public official or somebody of importance, that person will not be in that car, because that person that was driving that car happened to be a female and she died. And she was also intoxicated, and he wasn't supposed to be with her. So that was my first encounter of code blue. And there's different rounds of code blue as time goes on. And code blue is a camaraderie thing that the cops want to be together and they want to, show their support, which is a good thing. I've been involved in that millions of times, and I support that. What I don't support is when we have cops that are covering for other cops. And I saw this throughout my career, and then I saw it in my own department, and I called it out one day. And the day I called it out, I thought I was going to get canned. And I was in a union. I happened to be the union rep. And I was pulled in my sergeant's office, and he says, "You need to talk to the chief." I'm like, "What about?" He says, "Because," he says, "you have a mouth and it won't quit." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, well, that's nice to know. Thank you very much. I went to Chief's office. I guess you need to talk to me. He says, well, Dave, this is how we play games here. He says, and the game is you need to play the game. And I'm like, well, what's the game I'm not playing? He says, you need to be part of the team. I'm like, well, I am part of the team. I wear the badge, bulletproof vest, I got a gun, I'm all ready to go. And he goes, no, he says, when things go on, don't fuck the system. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, when is this going to become criminal? And that's what's going through my mind. If something becomes criminal here, I'm really going to be upset, because I'll go straight to the Attorney General for the state of Wisconsin. And actually, I was prepared to do that at one point, because there were certain things that were going on off duty that I wasn't impressed with, and that's when I opened up my mouth. And I told the two guys, you better watch it, because being the union rep, we're not going to be able to support you for the things that you're doing off duty. That's kind of how this all started. So the code blue, once again, came into play, and the chief was even involved in it. So I kind of distanced myself from that, and my time went up, my rank started going up, other people started to leave, and then I started to have my way of saying the way I wanted it to be. And that's when you become a ship commander, you become a lieutenant. And then when I started getting a little bit higher up in notary of the public's eye, I started being a little bit more vocal. And my vocal was that, listen, you guys need to play the game, but the game is this, it's called truth. You put that badge on, and that's your life, that's the way it's going to be. And I was pretty hardcore about that. And everybody kind of knew that about me. They knew that, hey, if you do the right thing, Dave won't screw with you. If you do the wrong thing, Dave will talk to you and he'll give you the break. And I was known in my jurisdiction, back in my other jurisdiction, that if you get stopped by me, or if you confront with me, if I investigate you for something, and I do something to you as far as legality-wise, going to jail or go to prison, you got it coming, because Dave gave you the breaks in the past. So that was the reputation I wanted, and I always wanted it that way. That was the way my father raised me. You be truthful to everybody, give people the breaks when they deserve it, but when time comes, if they need to be hammered, they need to be hammered. And that's how I kind of ran my things. Well, then we moved the clock forward, and Dave becomes the chief of police. Now I'm in my own little department, and I have a few officers that are in the code blue. And I knew it probably within 2 weeks. It took me 2 weeks to figure out that I had at least 2 cops that were in the code blue era, where they figured that if one does something wrong, the other one's going to cover for him. And most of it wasn't, in my opinion, at the time, most of it wasn't criminal. It wasn't even misdemeanor stuff. It wasn't just right. It was, really, you did that? I mean, why would you have to do that? It was kind of one of those deals. So I started monitoring what they were doing in the department. There was just certain activities that were going on, and then I started finding out they were having parties. They used to call them driveways back in the day, and they would have a party in the driveway, and all the cops would come over. They were off duty. The guys that were on duty, they'd stop by, and they'd camaraderie thing. It was fine, but then from there it started going a little bit to another point, because the guys were getting drunk, and then they were driving home drunk, and then one of them got into an accident, and they covered the accident. We never did get in an accident. So it was one of those deals where I knew something was going on, so I had a meeting. I pulled a meeting, pulled them all in. I said, listen, this is the deal. I know what code blue is. And they're looking at each other like I'm talking Polish to them. Well, I'm Polish, and I do speak Polish. So I'm like, no, I'm speaking English to you. And they just didn't understand that I wasn't going to play the game. And they still played the game. I was getting phone calls from other jurisdictions. They're saying, hey, you and your guys, your cops are involved in some of this stuff. And I'm like, I can't have a whole department that's throwing upside down here. And I was told, no, you don't. You only got about 3 rotten eggs. So it was time for Dave to go through the refrigerator and pull out the carton of eggs and find out what was going on. So I shook it, and I flipped it upside down, and 3 of them fell out. I terminated 3. 2 of them took me 9 months because of unions, which union rep, so I knew how it went. So I knew this was going to happen. It was going to take a little while. And the union reps, the union of the WPPA, which is located in Madison, Wisconsin, their head dude told me flat out, he said, Chief, I know who you are. We've had supper together numerous times in the past. He says, and I know what your objective is. He says, but we have to represent these two officers. He said, we have no choice because of the union. And I said, I understand that, but I said, I'm going to guarantee you you're wasting your money. Because I said, these guys are going to go down, they're going to go down hard. Well, one of them went down hard, almost with a criminal charge. The other one ended up, the one that was going to criminally charge him with stealing evidence from the evidence locker. He was stealing cocaine, taking it to parties, and he was having fun with the girls at the party. So this is all within the first 3 months of my chiefness. So I decided to terminate the one that I was going to terminate him. I put him on suspension, and I was going to just go for outright termination. The union was actually supported. He took his truck at a .32, and he totaled it, and he broke his pelvis in the accident. He was almost killed. He gets out of he's in the hospital. I went to go visit him in the hospital, and he was sober and kind of a little bit regretful of what happened. And I said, you know, Rob, I said, by the way, I do change the names here to protect the innocent. I said to Rob, I go, Rob, I said, you understand I'm terminating you? And he says, yeah, I understand. I said, you understand that you will never work as a cop ever again in the state of Wisconsin? He said, yeah, I understand that. I said, okay. So I figured he was going to resign, make it easier. No, he decided he wanted to fight it. And that good old cold blue, you know, we'll stick together. Well, my officers figured out pretty quick that I wasn't playing any games with their cold blue and their little antics that were going on. I ended up firing 3, 2 resigned, and I ended up replacing pretty much the entire department after everything was said and done. I hired a female investigator. I hired a sergeant that became like my canine handler. I hired another officer to become a canine handler and also another sergeant. So I ended up replacing staff. I couldn't replace my 2 secretaries because I knew those 2 women were involved in some of this stuff. But we had a nice little chit chat, and I explained, listen, I said, I can't really fire you as much as the administration can, like the mayor and the board, they can do that. But everything kind of mellowed out, and once I got rid of the apples, it was good. And when I left that department, I had some really good cops. I mean, I was proud to be their chief. I was proud to be their friend. They used to come over our house all the time, and it was nice to know that the cops could walk in. You know, we're in the middle of supper, and hey, can I talk to you, Dave? And Jamie was very, you know, accommodating to that. And with all that kind of pressure that goes on, it's nice to know that your cops are finally backing you up, and I really enjoyed that in my life, and that's my experience with Cold Blue. Cold Blue is a real thing. It happens today. I see it happening. I don't know what happened in Texas here a couple weeks ago with the mass murder, but I'd be willing to bet, just from my experience, that somewhere along the line, when you got a chief, you have 15 officers that were supposedly sitting in that hallway trying to evacuate people, and they didn't make the move to get into that room, which, once you're an active shooter, with my experience with this, once you're an active shooter, you're pretty much an active shooter. It doesn't go to a barricaded subject, and it just doesn't. We've had an active shooter in our technical college back home, 3,000 kids in the campus, and we had one go in there with a rifle. And, you know, he could have found millions of places to be a barricaded subject, but once you're an active shooter, the games are over. And I've been involved in entry teams in the SWAT, which we call now SRTs. They're called, we don't call them SWATs in our state anymore. They're called SRTs, which stands for, I just forgot what SRT stands for. They're called SRTs, just remember that, write that down. So, I got these cheat cards, by the way, and I got one of them here that says my alias name is Ferris Bueller. But there's a lot of times that people would call for me and they'd be going, Bueller? Never wrong. I got a couple things that I wanted to talk to, because Kathleen kind of, she did a really good job for me, and she put together some things that want to be talked about And the code blue was important to me because it does still continue today. It's there, I see it, the mass shooting in Texas. I have a funny feeling that might come down to code blue. Why did these guys, and I'd like to know out of those 15 cops that were in that hallway, how many were lieutenants, how many were captains, how many were sergeants, how many were corporals? If any of those were ranked in there, any one of them could overrule that chief immediately. They could overrule them. Would not probably be a good thing at the end of the day for those guys, but that group of 15, somebody knew that what they were doing was wrong. They had to, and if they didn't, they were definitely trained wrong. And my training as an active shooter, I've been teaching active shooter since 3 weeks after Columbine. And right now, today, I talk about my SINS training that I do every day or every week. I also set up active shooters. How do I want to put it? I go to companies. Tolmar is the one I'm working with right now. They make medical supplies in Fort Collins. I go to their office, I talk to their management, I talk to HR, and we get everybody on the same page, all the employees. We find out what cameras are working, what not working. We're in the process of numbering all the doors in the outside and inside. So if I'm in here and I look at the door and I'm in door 15, door 15 is going to be also on the other side, which is the outside usually. So there's things that I do now to this day that I still go through, and I teach companies what they need to be doing. I'm in the process of doing La Primo Foods, which is a big cheese company, and they go all the way to 1,000 miles away to Colorado from Wisconsin and end up working at a cheese factory for security. You have no idea how much crap I take for that. But I do things like that yet to this day, and I have a lot of experience in active shooter. And I'm not only that I've experienced it, but I've trained it. I trained it to officers, and I trained it to civilians when it comes to their workplace environment. So I still do a lot of things at my age now. I have a lot of little time left that I can still bark things out and still say, hey, I got a little bit of experience here. As time goes on, the knowledge is still there with me. After the last 8 years, my knowledge is still there. My mind's still clicking. My body's sure to hell of it. But the mind is still clicking, and I'm still mentally engaged. I know what to do, and I want to pass some of this stuff on to some of the people that I work with, and I am, and they're sucking it in and they're taking it and rolling with it. But through all this garbage that goes on, and there's a lot of it that goes on behind the doors when people want favors and they want things from you when you're a chief or when you're higher up in the brass. The one thing that kept me stable throughout this whole process was her. She was the only one. She's the unsung hero of law enforcement's wives. A lot of people don't understand that the wife, she stays home. She knows every freaking thing that goes on in my life. I mean, she knows everything. I come home and she goes, so what happened with the city board? And I look at her and go, you really want me to go through this again? Yeah, you need to talk about it. So, and I did, I vented to her. And she knew more what went on than anybody did. But she was also the one that when people would come up to her at work, they'd come up and say, Jane, so, you know, my husband and I were out on the deck and we heard all these sirens. It was like one squad car after another. Ooh, that's my shoulder. So, and she's like going, and Jamie's like, yeah, really? Yeah, what happened? Jamie goes, I have no idea. Well, you should know. Isn't your husband the cop or the chief? And she goes, yeah, but I don't know what went on. And that incident happened to be when my cops got shot. And that's why all the cops were going down the road, just past where this lady used to live when her and her husband were having a toddy on the back of the deck. But they thought she would squeal and tell everybody what was going on, and she didn't. But that was day after day after day, those things happened. So she was my rock, and a lot of cops, if you talk to a lot of chiefs, they'll say that the vent is usually at home. And she put up with a lot of it, and that is my secret, that people say, well, what's your secret? Well, I got a great wife, and I used to go home and I'd talk to her and tell her what's going on. She'd give me her opinion. Obviously, she was wrong, but no, I'm just kidding. She was right a lot of times, and she was right to the point where she said, you just need to calm down. You need to understand their point of view. And then she give me the opposite side of the hill, and it worked. And so she was kind of my balance, and that's one of the reasons why she's here, because I wanted to let everybody know here that she's there. Kathleen put in here, let me look at this real quick. I want to read this. She said something about, oh heck, I'll just tell you what it is. She's on a routine day, I think is what the usual. I never had a routine day. I never had a day that was the same as the yesterday. It was never a day. Oh, geez, you know, I remember a day like this about 3 months ago. No, never. I walk in the office, the light was flashing on the phone, like, media, the mayor, or no, it wouldn't be God because he wouldn't call me, but it would be somebody. So I'd pick up the phone, and sure enough, something would happen. Either one of my cops got caught speeding on a road, or somebody's child they think is a runaway, they think has been stolen by somebody and abducted, and really it's a runaway. There was not one day in 7 years of being chief of police that any of that ever happened the same day. I've had people abducted. I've had people who, we had these guys, you Google this one, this is an interesting one. But we had a guy about my first 3 months as a chief, 4 months, because it was after I started getting rid of cops. My problems start, I don't have any cops. But I had a guy that was missing, and he lived about 3 blocks from the police department. His mom and dad came in and says, you know, he doesn't do this, he should be home, and he's an adult. He's like 19 years old. And I said, well, where was he at? It was the day after the 4th. They said, well, he was downtown, and he was by the river, and they said he was very drunk, and they thought maybe he fell in the Wisconsin River. And if you fall in the Wisconsin River, in Wisconsin, you're probably going to die. Statistically, from all the drownings I've ever had in that river, nobody survived. Nobody has ever survived that. So anyway, he's missing, and I had a bad feeling about this. The parents were talking the truth. The friends were saying, hey, you know, he was down by the river. So I decided to open a search. And if you have any idea what it's like to open a search, it costs a lot of money. And I brought in dogs from Appleton, I brought in dogs from Fond du Lac, and I brought in 2 dogs from Madison, Wisconsin, and they were cadaver sniffing dogs. And 2 of them were really good at sniffing the river. So they can actually sense a dead body through the water. Very specialized field for these dogs, but it was a great asset. So we ended up getting 4 pontoon boats, put these dogs in the pontoon boats, and we went up and down the river all the way to there's a dam in a city called Port Edwards, Wisconsin. And that's where the major dam was. So if a body gets hung up, it's going to get hung up in the dam. So we went up and down, both sides of the river. We were looking everywhere. And this Wisconsin River, this part of the river, it's got lots of stumps. So a body could get hung up pretty easily in there. But if it did, the dogs would probably sense that even better instead of the moving water. We shut off the dam upriver so we didn't have the current going. But then one of the handlers from Fond du Lac said, no, get that dam open, get that water moving, because it's going to help us. Oh, okay, so we opened the dam back up again. Nothing. The cadaver dogs had a slight hit, but they weren't 100% sure, so we're like, oh, okay, so we moved forward. Then we started doing an air search. I contracted helicopters from the National Guard, which is located in Fort McCoy, Wisconsin. And they were very kind to say, yeah, we'll give you want to put a cop up in there in a helicopter? Yeah. So we had 2 helicopters running this route between the Wisconsin River to this kid's house, was about 7 miles. And they ran up and back and forth, looking to see if he maybe wiped out in the field, or if he died, or something happened to him. Nothing. So about 4 days go by, I'm at another meeting, and then all of a sudden we get a call that another kid is missing. This kid was playing pool at a local bar in town, and he did not take his truck home. He disappeared that night. Truck was still there, but he wasn't. So now we're searching for another kid that disappeared. And as the next 24 hours go by, we didn't know what was going on yet. It was like, this is kind of weird. We got 2 missing adults, about the same age. One was I think he worked at a salon or some, did nails and stuff. It was a nice kid, but he was playing pool, and something just went wrong there. So I'm at a board meeting with the city council, and somebody called 911 and said they have a naked person standing in front of their house. It was an elderly couple, they were in their 80s, and said he's in shackles. He's got chains around his feet, he's got chains around his hands, and he's crying. Well, it turned out to be the kid that was in the bar. So I busted out the door along with half of the whole county went. And we went there, and we're going up the driveway, and this guy comes out of the house, and he says, everything's fine. He says, I got both of them here. We're playing cards and stuff like that. And I looked at him, and we ordered him down to the ground with a gun, because now we got a guy that's shackled, and we didn't know where the other kid was. Well, he comes out of the house, and he unhandcuffed this other kid, and he's stepping like this. He gets down the stairs and shuffles down the driveway, and we're all like, well, I was like, oh my God, that's the kid we're looking for, the original kid. So we took this guy into custody, and what he did is he abducted these guys, took them down the stairs. He had a basement all set up with pipes coming out of the floor. They were concreted over. They had loops in them, and he had them cuffed. He had them shackled, and he was sodomizing these guys. See, the kid that escaped was in the garage, hanging from a hook in the rafters. And this is, I'm telling you, this is all true. And she started to swing his feet. And she got the guy that abducted him out of the house. And his name is Lampier. What was his first name? Ed Lampier. You can Google him. He's in prison for life. And that, I didn't change his name. So, and so he swung enough, he got hold of a ladder that this Ed guy set up against his workbench. He wrapped his feet around it, dragged it over to him, opened it up somehow, and unhooked himself, and then he ran across the street. That's how this whole thing went. So when he comes home, he came home because the kid that was swinging from the rafters says, I need a smoke. So Ed went out to the local convenience store, which is about 3 miles away, to go buy cigarettes for him. So when he got him out, he figures this is my time to get the heck out of here. And then when he came home, he saw all coming down, and he was just getting into his house, and he's got to come up with something here. And he started making up the story that the kids were in the house. He admitted that they were there. He didn't know that the kid was in shackles across the street already. The cat was out of the bag. So it was an interesting story. It went on for about a week and a half. The whole story did. The trial lasted almost a month. And this guy worked in a paper mill in Wisconsin Rapids. Was known by everybody. Everybody knew this guy. Hey, Ed, how's it going? Nice guy, plays pool. He played pool in the bar where he abducted this one kid. The other kid, he found him walking drunk by the river and took advantage of him then. So that was just one incident that happened my first 3 months there, and I'm thinking to myself, oh boy, we're really going to have a fun time here. And I did. I mean, I kept my sanity. I had a beautiful wife that helped me through a lot of things, because I do have PTSDs. And my PTSDs was caused because of 2 kids that were in a car crash. I found it. They were burned to death. And it happened in front of me. I had no idea what was going on. And after that incident, I had a problem. I was like, I don't like watching kids die. And I dealt with it for about a week. My chief gave me a week off, and he said, get off and, regroup. I tried pulling the kids out, and it didn't work. And they were stupid. They stole a car, and they were flying down this road, and they ended up wrapping around an oak tree, and it exploded on impact. And I just happened to be on patrol, and I come down the road, and it's like 3 in the morning. And it looks like that's a car burning? When I got closer, I found the kids. One was ejected, but he was already on fire from the gas. So it was a tough time. Shortly thereafter, after I came back to work, I went into it. I got a call of a possible suicide, attempted suicide. And so I was the first cop there, and I pulled in the driveway. And as I'm pulling my squad in, we had Crown Vics then. And as I'm pulling in, I hear this, and I heard the noise, and I knew it was a gun, but I didn't know where the rounds were going. Well, unbeknownst to me, they were going into my upper part of my windshield, right across the top of the windshield. So I'm hitting the deck, there's glass flying around, little bits and pieces of glass. And they went down and I hit the deck and I went to go peek up and he took the gun to his head. So that was 3 weeks after the 2 kids. So I got to regroup a little bit because then I got to go back a little bit because here, my wife and I, was that last year or 2 years ago, we were up in Wyoming. We were going to go to Jackson Hole. I got a brother that lives up there. So it's 2 years ago. So we're up in Jackson Hole and we're driving. We got a Jeep Wrangler. They got that flat windshield that the Jeeps do, and they get rock chips all the time. We went past the semi and that noise came back because something hit the windshield and it was big and it almost came through. It was almost, I still think to this day it was a bottle. I think the truck driver threw the bottle out and it hit that windshield. And it was the same kind of sound as the impact of it. Well, that's when the PTSDs kick in again. Yeah. It's like, oh, flashback. And so when I was diagnosed with PTSDs, I was trying to become the chief. And I had to take a psychological test. I passed. And they said to me, do you realize that this guy you're hiring does have PTSDs? And they said, what from? And they said, well, because of a lot of the incidents that he's been involved in, you know, it kind of takes a toll on you. It's a different PTSDs from when I was in the military. When I'm in the military, you know, if you see combat and, you know, you suffer a body on a wound, or if you see somebody else get blown up, that can result in a PTSD. My PTSDs was related to law enforcement. And it's very, very common with cops. They're not diagnosed with it a lot because they don't go to the proper people to get diagnosed. I am not on medication, never have. I ended up dealing with my problems that I was having, and my problems were dreams. She found that out the hard way. And I would wake up sweating. I would wake up just thrashing. What's the matter? I'd bell her things out of the middle of the night. Get out of there. I would say things that were related to the incidents that I was involved in. And there was 7 of them actually total. There was a family of 4 that drowned, a family of 5 that was killed. There was 7 incidences that caused this. And I just figured, well, you got to deal with it and you move on. Well, as I became chief, the PTSDs kind of subsided because it comes into a control issue. Because if I'm in control, I'm good. If I'm not in control and I got somebody else telling me what to do and it's not good and I don't agree with it, that kind of sparks things off a little bit. She's looking like, yeah, I ain't kidding there. So the PTSDs comes with cops. It's not uncommon. When you get into the rural areas that I lived in, you see a lot of goofy stuff that goes on in these rural farm areas. I mean, the suicides are more interesting. They're inventive. They become very inventive. I had a guy that did it with 3 12-gauge shotguns, and to this day, I still haven't figured out how he did it all. But he didn't have anything left when he was done. Yeah. But they become inventive. The hangings. I had a guy hung himself from a tree with his jacket in front of a lake, and 2 girls were canoeing by. He's sitting up there, he ties the arm piece around his neck, ties the rest of the jacket around the limb, and he's laying there like this, and as the girls are going by, he falls off the limb, 9 feet up in the air. So the goofy, I covered 42 suicides in my career. I've got every one of them documented. I have every one of them. I have all the paperwork on every one of them. I kept it. I mean, copies of it, and I kept it because I figured one day I was going to write a book on this because there's so many different angles of it, and not one of them out of the 42 is the same. They're all different. Asphyxiation, driving a car into a tree. I mean, it's just every cotton-picking scenario you can think of. You know, it's kind of like, wow, really? So those things combined with the crashes I've seen, the homicides I've been involved in, the drugs I used to buy. I was a drug agent for 2 years. I had an earring in this ear and I had long hair down to here. My name was Bob. Hey, Bob. What happened up here? You're smart. Yeah, we'll talk when we get home. So, you know, the drug stuff, at first it was exciting, but then after a while that became more of a, am I going to live tomorrow? So I got out of that and went back into the patrol division and started doing what I should have been doing. And the cop thing with the drugs and stuff, it's all fine and somebody needs to do it, but I just wasn't made for that. It wasn't my cup of tea, I guess you can say. So I'm kind end where I want to be. So I'd like to ask if there's anybody that has any questions. I got cards here, and I pretty much touched on everything I would like to talk about. But if you have questions, I am very available. I do talk to Christina, Kathleen. I'm sorry. I talked to Christina too. I talked to Kathleen about her book and some of the things that went on, and I do clarification of what law enforcement will do. I'm open for anything like that. Yes, ma'am.
Did you ever fear, given Code Blue, did you ever fear for your own safety as you disrupted the Code Blue?
Once. And it basically boiled down to, it wasn't them I was afraid of, it was my backup that I was afraid of. I did a traffic stop, and this was the one incident. I did a traffic stop on a car. The guy was wanted for a homicide in Milwaukee. I found that out. We have MDTs back in the day. There was MDCs, went to the laptops, Panasonic, but we had the MDT, which is a little green screen. It was in between. It was the old style computer system that they started off with. And I ran the guy's plate, and it started flashing. It was a bad boy in his car. So I called for backup, and two of the guys that were working, the two that I was going up against, Bob and Bill, and Jamie knows what I'm talking about. Bob and Bill, they were supposed to be responding, and they didn't. So I was stuck with this guy. Thank God, and I don't know what prompted this guy. Something came over him, and he just decided to say, you know what, you got me. Wow. And I'm thinking, oh, you got to be kidding me. I said, could you please lay on the ground? And I said, put your hands behind your back on the ground. He said, yes, sir, I will. Wow. And he did that. I cuffed him. I picked him up. I sat him up against the car, and I said, you have no idea how much you made my day. He says, I'm tired of running. And I kept looking behind me. There's still no backup. So I called another town next to me and asked them if they would do an investigation on these two guys, where they were. And it was supposed to be confidential. Well, we can't do that because we're going to have to notify your boss. And I'm like, no, we can't do that. And he goes, well, is there anything we can do to find out where these two birds were? And he says, let me do some digging and find out. They were 3 blocks away, parked car to car, side to side, and they were just waiting.
Wouldn't they be criminal?
No, they weren't. They were charged internally with failure to comply with police order, which is basically violating a policy. They were suspended for 2 weeks, back on patrol. By that time, my rank was going up. I was getting better to being alert of things, but they didn't care. They were like, well, let him deal with it. He wants to be a big guy on the campus. Let him be a big guy on the campus.
So did something happen to you?
I think that would have been a criminal investigation then of negligence. In this case, everything went fine. They asked me, the chief asked me, what do you want to do? I'm like, well, I don't know. What are you going to do? You know, I kind of threw it back at him, and I said, trust me, people are watching this. And what I mean by that is I contacted the DA for the county, which was in Adams County, Wisconsin. And he, in return, contacted the Attorney General, and we were watching it. And if they weren't disciplined accordingly, then things probably would have rolled the other way. But these two guys are no longer, well, one of them's still a cop, the other one isn't. So sometimes these guys, you know, when they get over their cold blue, or if they lose their buddies that they're camaraderie with, and the drinking that goes on off duty. We used to call it, back in my day, in the 70s, we used to call it choir practice. And it's kind of a joke, but it comes from a movie, a cop movie, and they used to call it choir practice. Everybody remember Hill Street Blues?
Yeah.
They used to call it choir practice there too, if you watch it from time to time. But there's times where I just shook my head and just, you know, really? You know, you guys are going to go this far with this stuff? You're going to kill somebody.
How big is the police department in the town?
The first one that I was in, that one was a small, rinky-dinky police department of just 7. The one that the county I was in, Adams County, that was 62 officers. Then my department, I had 8, 9, 12 sworn, and I had 2 secretaries, and I had 19 auxiliary, and then I also had, I had 63 firefighters, because for a period of time, I was a PSO chief, and a PSO in Wisconsin is a public safety officer, and I was a chief over the fire department and the police department. Trust me, I did.
What's that auxiliary, 19 auxiliary?
The 19 auxiliary were civilians that were on the department. They were unarmed, but they were sworn to uphold. They had to take an oath. They could do parking. They wrote offenses for, basically there were nuisance offenses. They would patrol, the bike patrol they would perform on the lakes, because we had a really nice lake in our jurisdiction. We also had 3 beautiful golf courses. My jurisdiction primarily was a retirement area. But then you go a little bit further into the city, then you had a paper mill, which is now closed. You had a lot of industrial then, but the communities out where we lived was pretty much retirement and stuff like that. But the department itself was small, in perspective of some of the other departments I worked in, but this department went through so much. I mean, if you Google this department in early days before, I don't know if you'll find it, but their chief was a barricaded subject prior to my arrival. They had a lot of issues going on. The chief was a good guy, but he ended up having problems, and he ended up having PTSDs, and then he ended up with dementia, and then he barricaded himself along with his son, took his son hostage, and the SWAT had to go in there, and SRT had to go in there and pull him out. Then I came along. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, this is kind of related to the code movement. Okay, at one point, I learned from somebody that a lot of, like, the Denver Police Department wouldn't hire one of these people. Yeah, big city wouldn't, but there were people being hired as cops in Colorado that had been fired from
Everywhere else.
terrible people elsewhere. And is there anything to keep, like when you said these guys will never work as cops in Wisconsin again? Is there anything that would keep them from going to Colorado or California?
Oh yeah, there is. It's an interesting question, and I'm wondering if you Googled this on me, because I'm the one that actually started it in the state of Wisconsin. I was the president of the Police Chiefs Association from 2012 to 2013. And during that time period, I saw a lot of cops coming through other departments and listening, going, "Really, Kurt? You hired that guy? Bob, didn't you fire him? Yeah, how did he get over here? Oh, I don't know, we never heard he was over there." So we formed a group of cops, and they're all chiefs. We had a decision to make, to saying, should we do this publicly or should we do this privately? And so we called our attorney, and our attorney says, actually, there's no law against it. You can talk amongst yourselves. So with all the chiefs in the state of Wisconsin, including the sheriffs, there were 72 of those, we ended up forming this group of cops and chiefs and sheriffs, and they meet every 3 months. And when they meet, they exchange names and who was terminated and who wasn't. And at that point, when we started doing this, we started getting a clue that these cops were actually bouncing around. And then we stopped it. We actually stopped it, and how we did is we would communicate. Don't hire this guy. Don't hire this guy. And it got worse as time went on, because these guys were getting frustrated. So they'd go to another state, and they'd try to be a cop in another state. Minnesota, Iowa, Illinois, they tried it, and then those chiefs, thank God, would call and say, why is this guy, we found that he applied in like 3 different locations in Wisconsin. Why are you not hiring him? Oh, we'd love to talk to you. And legally, there's a problem with that, but if you do it privately and not broadcast it to everybody and their brother, you can get away with it. A case in point, the incident that happened in Minneapolis, the cop that knee choked him, okay? Everybody's familiar with that. That case alone, that cop went from 3 precincts. And basically what it boils down to is that one commander of the precinct, and they called them commanders in Minneapolis, they got tired of him, they moved him to another precinct. And that's what, and he ended up in the last precinct where he caused this problem with George Floyd. And I said 1,000 times, I'll bet you $100 this cop's been bounced around and he should have been fired 15 years ago. Boy, was I right. It came out and I'm like, yeah, I'm not pretty good at this, you know, but you could, a lot of cops that are in my position, which is 1,000 of them out there, they see it and they see these things that happen and I'm like, boy, I can call probably 5 cops right now on the phone, put them on a speaker, and they'll tell you the same thing I just told you would happen down in Texas.
But it's still informal, so lots of opportunities to slip through the cracks.
They could slip through the cracks if they go further west or east, but if the departments are doing what they're supposed to do, and that is, I mean, when I hired my cops, I went to their previous employer, or I went to their home. I sat down with family, brothers, sisters. But then I got screwed by a cop, a chief, in northern Wisconsin. It's north of Eau Claire, Wisconsin. I went to go talk to him about a cop I was going to hire. Oh, yeah, Dave's a great guy. He says, man, yeah, all for him and everything. And, you know, they were looking forward to him getting hired somewhere else to get higher up in ranks. So I hired him. And I promoted him to sergeant. I did. Nobody else. Well, the chief of the police and fire commission was involved in it, but we were all in agreement. You know, we hired him. He turned out to be one of the most ignorant people I've ever met. I mean, he pulled stuff that I'm like, I looked at him and said, Dave, you gotta be kidding me. And he looks at me and he goes, what? I said, you got 4 of the cops doing your job from another jurisdiction that you should be doing. Why aren't you doing it? Well, you know, I don't know. Well, come to find out, from another cop that worked in this little town north, he ended up getting hired at the sheriff's department in my jurisdiction. And he tells me, oh, he says, Dave, he's that Chief Buffalo. He's one of the dumbest cops. He says that's in Amory, Wisconsin. And I just went, how did this guy slip through us? And he was a good BSer is what the bottom line was. He had a good line, he had a good talk, and he got through it. He is now still a sergeant after 8 years later, and he's still in charge of troops, and he's doing well. So I don't know if he grew up or if he stopped playing the shenanigans or whatever, but it does happen, you know. But Colorado has, from what I've seen, if you get hired in Fort Collins and leave Fort Collins, you might get hired in Springs, or you might get hired in Durango, or you might get hired in Pueblo. But if they're doing their job diligently and doing the background, the bad ones should not slip through the cracks. And we've got mandatory in Wisconsin, it is mandatory that you do a psychological evaluation of these guys now. And the psychological testing shows a lot. I mean, it shows their IQ. It shows, when I went through it, I was there for 8 hours and I felt about as stupid as the day is long when I walked out of there. I'm like, God, to ask the same question 5 times, come on, don't you got, and I thought about it, I'm like, oh, geez, Dave, they're looking for you to see how many 5 ways are you going to answer the correct answer. And it took me a minute when I was walking out of there going, oh my gosh, what did I do here? But I passed. And I passed, and the only thing that really scared me was my PTSD. That was scaring me because I didn't know what was I going to come into in the future as being the chief. I've seen enough, you know, I've seen a lot, but I figured I'd sit behind the desk and, chief needs a coffee, you know. It didn't work that way. I was very busy, I was very active, yes, sir.
Seems to me that there's a spectrum from total corruption to total openness and honesty, that somewhere on that spectrum is the code blue. Also in there is the qualified immunity, which, you know, code blue is maybe unethical qualified immunity or whatever.
Oh, okay, I get you. I follow what you're saying, yeah.
You know, that's an arguable legal protection, but there's a spectrum there. And how do you see that evolving? I mean,
I don't see it stopping. I think it's always going to be there, and I think it's up to the department heads, whether it's the chief or the commanders or the captains. I'll go down as far as the lieutenant to recognize the good and the bad. And if they can recognize the bad and keep pushing it away. I mean, the bad's been pushed away in my lifetime. After 35 years of doing this job, I think it started going away about 10 years ago, maybe 15, but there are still the smaller departments, you know, like mine, that had their little issues going on, and, hey, well, let's take some cocaine and get some chicks high. Those are stupid cops. They should have never been hired. And the vetting of hiring the better cops out there has started. It's harder to be a cop. Wisconsin now just jacked up the requirement from associate's degree to a bachelor's degree. So what that does is that it gives a little bit more educated cop, and before you hire them, they have to go through the academy, so they've already been through the rigmarole. So it's easier to vet these guys out a little bit. I'm starting to see what I've been seeing, even in my civilian life now, that I'm seeing, and I'm talking to the cops and the chiefs and stuff, and they're telling me, we're not getting them like we used to. There's just a lot of kids nowadays that are growing up that are in there. They just don't want anything to do with law enforcement because they see things that have happened over the last couple of years. Good or bad, I could have predicted most of that here probably 5 years ago. You could kind of see that trend coming, and it'll be a trend, and then it will go away, and the support for law enforcement will come back. It is coming back, and it's doing well. You're going to get through cities that are going to be anti-police. Unfortunately, it comes from the top, and if the top is dictating it down, then you're going to end up with problems in that spectrum you're talking about. You're going to end up with all kinds of problems in the middle with bad cops, because they're going to say, well, we don't have to do that. They're not going to do anything to us if we don't do that. So it's kind of a motion, but I only see that in the bigger cities. And I don't even mean like Denver. I mean, bigger cities to me would be like Fond du Lac, Appleton. Those are bigger towns. And you can see where the trend is going, but the trend is right now in the bigger cities is we don't get enough cops. There's not enough, you know, back in my day, I didn't make a whole hell of a lot, but it was the pride, and it was just, you know, being involved. My dad was a Chicago cop. My dad was President Eisenhower's bodyguard. So I come from a line of that respect. You don't really see a lot of that anymore. But when the kids that I encounter with, how much do I make? You know, that's what they're worried. How much am I making? Well, shit, you ain't gonna make a lot. You're gonna put your life on the line. You're gonna run into things you probably don't want to run into, and you're gonna probably see things that nobody's ever seen before. But you're not gonna get paid a lot. And when the guy says, that doesn't bother me. When you get a guy like that, that's the guy you want. If your guy starts questioning, well, geez, and I'm only gonna get paid, you know, $55,000 a year for that. You know, my cops were making $63,000 a year starting pay. In central Wisconsin, that's a good pay. That's a good salary for a starting cop.
Did you have to fight for that, or was that?
No, that was city council. Republicans, Democrats, I had a split right down the middle. They were all in favor of it. Politicians in my book have never been against the PD, either way, but my problems were agreeing upon what I wanted to do. And I came in a department and said, every cop should have his own squad car. Holy criminy, I thought I committed something wrong there. Well, anyway, I got it though. And I just went to the right people and talked to the right people on both sides of the fence. And then they said, no, it kind of makes sense. He's going to save us money. Yeah, up front it's going to cost us money, but he's going to save us money down the long run. I took all the lights off the cars. I put all the lights inside the car. I went to Panasonics instead of Dell for computers in the car. I changed everything. But, you know, the first year as your chief of police, you've got a honeymoon. So yours truly took advantage of it big time. I wasn't stupid. I've seen it before. So I took advantage of it. I got people convinced in it, and that's how I did it. And the department grew, and it grew. And now every cop in that department still, after I left, they were driving Dodge Chargers. The K-9 guys were driving Chevy Tahoes. So I did well for that, for the budget, but it wasn't me. It was the people that elected these people in there to make it work. And I was fortunate. I mean, I had a couple board members, pros and cons, Democrats, Republicans. It doesn't matter. They just didn't. Oh, I don't care what you do. Whatever you do, just do it. I like you. I don't have to argue with them. But then there's people that want to watch and see my budgets. My budget was over $1.4 million. And in that budget, I had to watch what I was doing. I mean, it was tough. I was balancing a budget, but I had my budget and I was over it one year, and I went home, talked to my wife, and she said, "No, you're doing fine." I was fine with it then. Everything comes back to her. So I do really want to tell everybody that behind every cop is a good wife. And
what's the woman cop?
behind every woman cop is a good, thank you, because I had them on my department, but they also had husbands that were cops, 2 of them, matter of fact. But behind every woman cop, there is a very good husband. I never saw it go, it goes both ways, but it was always the same. My female investigator that I hired, she's still there. Her husband is a retired DNR warden in the state of Wisconsin. He was actually a firearms instructor for the Department of Natural Resources. He's there by her side. She's been shot at. There's where your code blue comes into play. When you get a cop that gets shot, everybody pulls together, and it kind of strengthens that department together. Happens in every jurisdiction. But in Tammy's case, and that's her name, and change her name and protect her innocence. But in Tammy's case, I always used to ask her, "Are you safe at home? You know, is your husband?" "Oh, yeah, Roy's the best. You know, he's the best." And I used to check with my cops, you know, "How's your wife doing? How's your girlfriend treating you?" I'd always ask because I wanted to make sure that they had the same opportunity I had when I went home. If they don't have that avenue, problems will start. It'll start, there's no lie about it. And I apologize for not bringing that up because as far as female officers go, I was the only one in the area in central Wisconsin that took a chance on hiring a female investigator. They thought I was nuts. And, "Well, why are you hiring her? She came from Fond du Lac." And I said, "Well, because she's got this instinct in her that I've never seen before in a cop. She wanted to drive and just find out the answer, no matter how small it was. She just had that drive." And Jamie's nodding her head. She was probably one of the top-notch investigators in the state of Wisconsin